Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great. Good. Perfect. Hi, Betsy.
Good morning.
How are you?
I have bronchitis, so
Oh,
it stinks.
I'm so sorry.
I'm over the hump of it.
That sounds awful.
And I got COVID tested, so it's not COVID. So it's just seasonal allergy plus whatever, life.
Joyful lung inflammation. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Good, good. Yeah, we've been doing really well. It's been a strange week for unexpected events, but as you do.
Yeah, life is full of unexpected events.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth?
Yes.
Stacy is here. Here comes Carrie. We'll give people another couple of minutes to show up. Stacy, I didn't get to ask you how you are.
I'm good. I'm just finishing my hair. I'm like, I'll be on in a second, really.
Oh my God, do not do it on our account, please. We're pretty low key.
Yeah.
Carrie, how are you? Can you hear me yet, Carrie? Are you with us? Carrie, is your sound on? Can you hear me? Got it.
Okay, I think I'm here.
Yay! How are you?
I'm good. There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So I know I ask this every time. Do you think we should wait? Or should we just get going? And usually I just get going because I'm terrible at waiting. I'm so impatient. Sorry.
So already 2 minutes after, maybe just one more minute, let people figure out Zoom in case they're not used to Zoom, because it's a new group, right? An expanded group.
Yeah. Okay, so one more minute. I can do it, guys.
Some deep breathing exercises.
That's right. My neuroses are starting to show.
Oh.
Actually, my grandfather was so impatient that if there was more than one person standing in a place, he would pace so it didn't feel like a line. Yeah, he also once rear-ended a car that was moving, like they were already driving. He just wanted to go faster. Family.
Oh, yeah, you have to be careful about that because that'll really actually slow you down.
Yeah, no doubt. Right. Not an effective strategy. Yeah, I cannot argue for this being effective. All right, guys. Well, that was as much as I can do.
So we made the minute. It's 10:03. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Wow. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody hear me okay? Are we good for audio and everything? Okay. If anybody's having any trouble, just stop me at any time because I get into the flow and then forget to check like chats and things. So, all right, here we go. Okay. This is actually my favorite part of MTHFR because it's so freaking strange. And it's the biggest problem that we all have is actually finding the right dose, because finding the right dose means we're on the right path, right? Like we're actually moving forward in the most effective and most efficient way possible. But as you have all probably noticed, it's a whole different ball game when you're dosing methylfolate versus dosing like vitamin C, right? Nobody has giant fallout from vitamin C. Lots of people have fallout from methylfolate. And so there's 3 reactions that I see very commonly when people start methylfolate. The first one is that like, the skies open up, it's a miracle. And for whatever reason, for some people, it continues to be a miracle. And that's amazing. I love it when this happens. It does not happen most of the time. This is maybe 15 to 20% of the people that I see. And I do have to caveat here. I see a particular population of people who do tend to have more trouble, because the ones who don't have trouble get like a 15 milligram Deplin prescription from their psychiatrist or from somebody like that, their infertility specialist, and they do great, right? The other ones get a giant Deplin prescription, freak out, completely lose their mind, and then 3 years later, when they're brave enough, then they come back and see me. So my group self-selects, right, for the people who did not do okay with that first giant dose of Deplin. There's the most common group that I see is it was a miracle, like it felt really good for a second, and now it doesn't, right? Now it feels not good at all. Sorry, let me just volume down on that guy. And then there's also this other group that from the get-go, 5-LMTHF is awful, right? It's miserable, it's difficult to take, they don't like it, they don't feel well with it, or it makes symptoms worse. And some people, it always makes symptoms worse, right? Like some people never tolerate it. So MTHFR is not your average supplement, and none of the supplements that make this methylation pathway spin are the average supplements. So when I say like 5-LMTHF in this presentation, you can apply that to SAMe, you can apply that to trimethylglycine. Basically anything that's going to make this pathway turn is suspect, right? It can do the same thing. Even methyl B12 for a lot of people just creates like the crazy pants reaction. So we've got to be careful with it. So balancing methylation is always the goal with MTHFR. And I know I talk about this a lot and everybody's sick to death of it, but everything that balances methylation does challenge your body in some way. And we are a group that happens to be genetically susceptible to that way of challenging our body, right? So this is literally the crux of the MTHFR journey. This is the hard part. This is also how we heal, right? So actually getting this methylation cycle spinning is the point. That's our goal here. That is exactly what we need to do. Because this is how we start to actually do the things that we're supposed to do with functional folate. This is how we actually methylate our genes. This is how we detoxify. This is how we address that backlog of work that has not been done in however many years or decades, right? So as we get the methylation cycle spinning, then that's how symptoms resolve, moods balance, energy and stamina increase, and the entire MTHFR gene mutation becomes a non-issue, right? Like that's exactly what we want. We want to just basically get this gene mutation to be quiet, to not affect us in our lives. And so spinning this cycle actually does take work, and it takes resources other than just methylfolate. And this is where most people fall down. Either they've got the wrong dose of methylfolate or they don't have the right background resources. And so we'll talk a lot about that. But this is why we run into walls, right? Like this is where people get stuck. So when I say something like balancing methylation or spinning your methylation cycle or whatever, any of these like air quote activities, this is what I'm talking about. So this folate cycle in the center, in that sort of terracotta color, is where the MTHFR gene actually sits. But the thing that it does that's the most important, like, so that little folate cycle basically just activates folate. It activates natural folate. But the part that's really important is the methylation cycle, right? So the folate cycle, we need that active folate to spin the methylation cycle wheel. And that's the one that converts methionine to homocysteine via SAMe, right? And SAMe is the universal methyl donor. And that is what we need in order to methylate things like DNA and proteins and lipids and whatever. So that methylation cycle in gray is the big deal, right? Like that is the big important part. And of course it's far more detailed than that, but I mean, we don't need the detail right now. We just need to know that's what's happening, right? So it's basically just a recycling process for homocysteine, and homocysteine is an inflammatory byproduct. We want it to be recycled back into methionine, but for that, we need to stick a methyl group on there, right? And for just stick a methyl group on there, we need active folate and we need SAMe. So there's two pitfalls with taking the wrong dose of 5-LMTHF or SAMe or TMG or whatever, any of the substitutes, right? One is bottleneck and one is overdose symptoms. And I do want to clarify, when I say overdose, this is not like a clinical street drug type overdose, right? That's an unfortunate medical situation that's different from this. I just mean overdose in that the dose is too high for your body and it produces symptoms. I need a different word, but I don't really have one. So maybe like symptomatic dose. I don't know, it's too high a dose, whatever. Okay. So the beauty of the right dose. So taking the right dose of 5-LMTHF, it does boost energy, which is wonderful. It improves mood, and it improves mood actually through the neurotransmitter pathway. So it's not just like, oh yay, I have energy and I feel well. No, it's actually like, okay, I'm making my serotonin today. That feels good, right? It balances that methylation, and that's something that happens in the background, but this is like methylating your genes, right? Like this is turning on the genes that need to be turned on and turning off the genes that need to be turned off. So this is what prevents cancer down the road, right? Like this is what protects your cardiac function. This is what helps the cells that need to die and be recycled to die and be recycled, and the ones that need to be regenerated to be regenerated. So that's like a giant deal, but it's not the part that we perceive or feel on a day-to-day basis. It also helps your body to safely and gently work out the backlog, right? And the backlog is your to-do list. This is all of the stuff that your body did not have the resources to do for the last, say, for me, 4.5 decades, right? So it can be a pretty big deal. Like there can be a lot on that list. And the right dose gives you the fastest possible progress through your symptoms, but also through that backlog. The right dose does not cause symptoms. It can cause a bit of an adjustment in the beginning because it feels a little weird when you actually have methylfolate versus never having had it, but it does not actually cause symptoms. And so if you're having symptoms that started after the methylfolate, it's the wrong dose, right? But ironically, people don't recognize that a lot of the time. So we'll talk about that too. So getting the right dose, I do want to clarify, it does not mean you'll never have a bad day again. Absolutely not, right? If you're working on backlog, there's going to be detox days. There's going to be days where stuff is coming up. There's also everything that happens in your life, right? Like there's the day you walk through the fragrance aisle and get, sprayed in the face with some crazy ass thing. That's happened to me. There's the day that the home renovations are just a little too much, or the paint smell gets to you, or the whatever. There's the day when you eat the completely wrong food for you, or you get food poisoning, or any of the normal things that happen in life, right? But what it does mean when you have the right dose is that you'll have the fewest possible bad days, and that the badness won't be caused by your methylfolate. And also less of it will be caused by your genetics, right? Like those MTHFR genes can actually be silenced. That's what we're looking for. We're just looking to make this quiet. So too high of a dose of 5-LMTHF feels a particular way. And this is almost universal. There is one exception to that, and that's a small group of very low serotonin undermethylators. And when I say very low, I mean bottomed out serotonin undermethylators. For those people, taking methylfolate feels like they've dropped in the bottomless pit of despair. All right. In my almost 20 years of practice, I have seen less than 5 of those people, right? Like it's a rare state. For everybody else, it feels a particular way, and it's basically like an amphetamine bad experience, right? Restless energy like that, cannot stop moving, always fidgety, uncomfortable in your skin, want to jump out of your skin type feeling. Anxiety for sure. And weird anxiety. It can be a physical anxiety. It can be weird intrusive thoughts. Like I had one patient who, so as she was driving, she had the sensation that she was going to throw the door of the car open and jump out while the car was in motion, right? Like that is a weird thought. She knew it was a weird thought. It was this incredibly strange thing that was just popping into her head when she was driving and then causing her to panic, right? She knew it was irrational. She knew she was not going to do this thing, but this thought was still intruding on her life and interfering with her actual driving, right? Like none of this came from any sort of a logical place. It's not like it was a very weird, intrusive thought for her. And it can happen in that way, or it can be just an increase in background anxiety. And that's much harder to spot, right? Like if you tend to have a little bit of anxiety anyway, and that background anxiety ratchets up a little bit with a dose, it can be a little bit hard to pinpoint. It can be irritability, right? Like everything just rubs the wrong way. Everything gets a little bit under your skin. It can be a feeling like you can't calm down, can't relax, can't physically relax your body, can't stop moving. Heart palpitations is a very common one. A lot of people will experience heart palpitations or like a feeling of a thump in their heart, like a strong heartbeat every now and then. Prickly or itchy skin, again, the intrusive thoughts. Sleeplessness, like people will be dog tired, lie down and just stare at the ceiling. Like they just cannot physically sleep. Hyperactivity, that happens to me. I'm the one that's like, oh, I should start every project in the house right now. How about I take everything out of every closet I own? Hey. Yeah, that's fun. Can't stop talking, like loquacity can be part of this, where people just poor impulse control. So some people get into that weird, like I'm making bad decisions and I know I'm making bad decisions, but I can't seem to stop myself from making bad decisions place, which is fun. Panic also, like panic attack, especially people who are prone to panic attacks can be thrown into that panic place. Yeah, basically it's the movie montage of like too much cocaine or too many stimulant drugs. Whee! That's fun. Plenty of people, especially if the dose is really too high, end up in the ER at this point, right? Like it feels bad, not just, if it's just a slightly too high dose, it's just annoying, right? But if it's like a massively too high dose, it's a trip to the ER very often. And not because their life is in any danger, just because it feels like their life is in danger, right? Symptom severity does increase with increasing dose. So if your body can tolerate 1500 micrograms and you take 1700 micrograms, you'll have symptoms, but they'll be tolerable, right? Like it won't be an ER visit. It'll be annoying and probably a sleepless night and, you know, whatever. If your body can tolerate 1500 milligrams or micrograms and you take 15 milligrams, you will be literally crawling on the ceiling, right? Like this is the ER visit time. And Deplin, honestly, like the prescription Deplin, that's been responsible for so many ER visits because it's just a giant dose, right? And so there's that small percentage of people who are like, oh, relief. And then everybody else is like, oh my God, I'm going to crawl out of my skin. Yeah. So you can kind of, especially with a little bit of experience, you can gauge how much of an overdose, I don't like that word, but I don't have a better one, overdose you've taken by how bad your symptoms are. Also, the effects are cumulative. So if you have a too high dose the first day, it's a little annoying. The second day, it gets worse. By the fourth or fifth day, it might be in that crawling up the walls place, right? Because it's building up. So just slightly too much actually feels quote unquote normal for a lot of people because they don't recognize it as a symptom. Also, it feels normal for a lot of people because they've never taken folic acid out of their diet. So if you've never taken folic acid out of your diet, folic acid could actually be pushing you into this place without you knowing it. So I have seen, I mean, so many people, hundreds of people who take folic acid out and they're like, oh, I don't know, my anxiety is suddenly better, right? It wasn't a natural anxiety to them. It was actually induced by folic acid, which is crazy. Because it's everywhere, right? Like so few people actually get the occasion to take it out of their diet, right? That it's kind of a revelation when they do. But anyway, so this slightly too much feels normal, quote unquote, for a lot of people because they don't recognize it as a symptom of something. It's just sort of part of their background symptom picture. So it could be a little bit restless sleep, a bit more anxiety maybe than they would normally have. But if you've lost touch with what your normal is, then that's unknown. Slightly manic energy, sometimes that feels good, actually. Like sometimes that's a nice place to be, the slightly manic energy. Intrusive thoughts here or there. So very often I'll have people who have intrusive thoughts who also get the folic acid out, and the intrusive thoughts are suddenly gone, right? And it's something that they've learned to live with. It's not like a big, this isn't their chief complaint. This is just something in the background. But it's something that I notice resolve with folic acid elimination a lot of times. But also, if we get people's dose of 5-LMTHF down a little bit, a lot of times that'll resolve. And then way too much for lots of people is a trip to the ER, right? Panic attack, feels like a panic attack that just doesn't end, like it's ongoing. I had one client who took a massive dose and 3 days later was in the ER because it just wouldn't stop, right? He was having heart palpitations. He could not sleep. He didn't sleep for that entire 3 days. Like that's a horrible feeling. And he was panicking. He basically thought, this is going to be me for the rest of my life. Like I have done one thing and it's destroyed me forever. Physically can't sleep, often for days or to the point of hallucination. Like it can get really ugly. So can't calm down, can't think rationally, can't stop moving, heart palpitations, and terror, right? Like there is actually a sense of terror that can happen here. And that's not a fun place to be. So first we have to find your baseline. So one of the things that I see very often, especially in clients who found out about MTHFR on their own and started treating themselves years ago, right? Like with just like Dr. Google guidance, and they've added in a bunch of stuff and taken a methylation supplement and or something with like 8 methylators in it and whatever, that they've lost touch with the symptoms that are their own, the symptoms that are caused by folic acid that's very often still in the diet, and the symptoms that are caused by 5-LMTHF or whatever methylation support they're taking, right? And so a lot of times people come to me in this muddle and we'll try a few basic steps. If we're not making progress, I'll actually back them out of everything, right? Like stop taking everything, just stop everything. Start at the beginning. Start with get the folic acid out of your diet, right? Like we are starting at step 1 and reintroducing some of these things in a more systematic way, because they don't know their baseline anymore. There's so many mixed symptoms in there from so many different things that it gets really confused. So, very often the thing I hear, overall, their symptoms have gotten better, but they've maybe had some new ones creep in, or they're just battling themselves because they've still got folic acid in their diet. And they've got the 5-LMTHF, which is probably at a higher dose than they need because it's being blocked by the folic acid. So it becomes this very confused, sort of muddy place. So this is where the dose check-in worksheet comes in handy. And I think on this journey, it's really important to check in with yourself every 6 to 12 months in that way, right? Because it's super easy to sort of slide into a place without noticing it that isn't actually the ideal place for you to be. And I mean, you know me, right? I'm suspicious of supplements anyway. I do not want people to be taking a whole bunch of supplements long-term. It just it's not the right thing for most people. What I do want is the right supplements at the right doses. So, the dose check-in worksheet, I think I actually called it a dose quiz, is uploaded into the course materials along with the PDF version of these slides. And once I can get it to upload to YouTube and do all that junk, then I will upload the video as well. That always takes me a little while because it's slow. I'm just not great at it. Not my strength. But yeah, I will do it as fast as I can. So lots of people with MTHFR are taking the wrong dose of 5L-methyl tetrahydrofolate without even knowing, right? Like they just don't, it's not on their radar that it's the wrong dose. It's just the wrong dose, right? And it can be too high, which produces symptoms every day, but it can also be too low. And too low doesn't give you any of the overdose symptoms, but it can keep you in this very stuck bottleneck place. And so bottlenecks happen when you're stuck, like that cycle is spinning, but it's not spinning fast enough to really get that backlog moving out of there. And some resources are missing, right? So it's like the cycle gets jammed. It's not spinning smoothly. It gets a little bit jammed at some places. And this is where you just keep falling into the same hole, right? Like if you have a repeating pattern where you're constantly back in the same place, you're in a bottleneck and it's not fun. Too low a dose of 5L-MTHF is just one of the reasons. Often it's actually a cofactor that's missing, right? Like, so people with MTHFR will very often start like a methylfolate, but they forget about the other B vitamin cofactors. They don't really get that cycle spinning. Also, a really big reason for bottleneck is dehydration. It just doesn't go without water, right? Like water helps to turn this wheel. And for whatever reason, for MTHFR folks, we are very susceptible, or we seem to be very susceptible to hydration issues. I have never seen research that says that, but within my patient population, water fixes a ton of things that like seem sort of miraculous for just water. So, so I think that's a big bottleneck contributor. So with bottlenecks, the most common causes I see, too low a dose, again, of methylfolate or whatever methyl workaround you're using, not enough riboflavin, which is B2, not enough B12, or the other B vitamins, right? Like so many people start the methylfolate without ever adding in that background of other B vitamins. And without the other B vitamins, this cycle cannot go forward, right? Even if you have active folate, it just can't, it can't go forward. Folic acid blocking progress. So this is a really common bottleneck reason as well, simply because when you have that folic acid in there, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like it's so shiny and perfect, right? Folic acid is a synthetic thing. It's not a natural thing. It's so shiny and perfect that your receptors grab onto it and won't let go. And so receptors become blocked by folic acid and the actual useful folate can't get in. Outside of that, the cycle slows down to accommodate the particular enzyme called slow DHFR that converts folic acid into sort of the first step in that folate cycle. And so there's a bunch of ways that folic acid actually blocks our progress. But what research is showing is that folic acid for MTHFR polymorphism specifically actually makes methylation slower rather than faster. So it's just not, it inhibits us in every way. It's just not helpful. And then again, not enough water with the bottlenecks. This is a really big issue, right? If I can't get progress in someone, then we go back and focus on the basics, right? Like how much water are you drinking? How much of everything else are you drinking? Let's get rid of everything else, except maybe a cup of coffee, focus on the water. Some signs that you're in a bottleneck. So if your progress has stopped or you keep facing the same issue over and over again, like it feels like you take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. If you're getting more sensitive to foods or allergens or chemicals or supplements, that's a bottleneck, right? Like that is a bottleneck right there. If you feel like you're stuck in the same place or you just can't get over a hump, that's a bottleneck. Also, a lot of people voluntarily go into bottlenecks because if they've had an overdose of methylfolate, they get really scared to try increasing their dose again. And it's hard to convince people that they want to try again, right? Because it's a scary place, especially if you're prone to anxiety or panic. And so So a lot of people will actually keep themselves in this kind of bottleneck loop where they're not really moving forward, right? They're just sort of sustaining because they're scared to risk an overdose, which is horrible to see as a practitioner, right? Like I know there's better, there's better for you. We can get you there, but yeah, I get it. And again, the dose that you need changes drastically over time, especially in the first phases of the MTHFR journey. But we're going to go through the whole like picture of this journey in this course, because I really want you to understand what's happening at every phase. Because that also, you know, like having that knowledge helps you to understand where your body is in that moment and helps you to actually react more appropriately to signals. So there's 3 kind of distinct parts to this journey, to lots of health journeys, honestly, but to this journey especially. We've got the preliminaries, right? And this is the part when we're just getting all that background work in, getting the folic acid out, changing diet, getting in the other B vitamins, getting the B12 that you tolerate, and then adding, you know, starting with the methylfolate. Then once we've kind of gotten over that hurdle, because that's kind of a big chunk of work, right? Once we've gotten over that hurdle, then there's this whole phase that I like to call pushing forward. And this is working on the backlog, right? Like this is where your body is actually internally doing the work of going through the stuff that hasn't been managed and actually balancing your methylation. It's not like you take 5-LMTHF and your methylation is balanced and you're done, right? Like this is a process for your body, and it actually does require a lot of work and time. This phase can last months, it can last years. It just depends on how good your self-care has been, how good your self-care is now, how good your diet is, your lifestyle, other genetic factors, blah, 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 right? So it's difficult to predict. For me, I think the main thrust of this part was about 3 years, honestly. And where, you know, like detox symptoms would come up really regularly. I could tell my body was working through stuff. My dose kept increasing and pushing forward. And then all of a sudden, bink, you hit a different wall and your dose goes way down, and then you're in a maintenance phase. And that's where I am now. And you know what? These phases aren't fixed. It's not like you go through 1, 2, 3, and then you're done forever. And you're in maintenance forever. No. Okay. So when I got pregnant and had a baby and there was a hormone washout, I went way back into phase 2. And there was a whole nother phase 2 that had to happen, right? Like, because now there's this other giant stressor on my body, right? So I had to kind of go back into that place, boost my dose, really follow it along and push it until I could get back into maintenance. But it happened much faster than the original phase 2. So don't feel like, you know, like, but I'm out of phase 2. I will never be back there again. Yeah, you might. Life. So we'll go over quickly each phase, and then we'll expand on this in much greater detail in coming weeks. But the preliminaries. So for MTHFR, this is the phase where you're getting ready to start, right? You're doing the groundwork. This is incredibly important. And again, if people come to me without ever having done this, a lot of times we just wipe the slate clean, go back to the beginning and start with the preliminaries again, right? And it's not to say that progress can't happen without these. For some people, it really does, right? Like some people are moving forward solidly. It happens in a much cleaner, neater, more predictable way if you do the groundwork first. Other conditions, especially chronic conditions, also have a preliminary phase, but too often we just jump right past that, right? Like we jump into the meat without building the bones, right? So this is all of the prep work. And I know everybody is sick to death of me talking about symptom tracking, but symptom tracking, sorry, I am actually obsessed with it. Yeah. Folic acid elimination. Also, this is where this should be happening. And once we've eliminated and seen how our symptoms progress, then we can add in some natural sources of folate, add a background of other B vitamins, start with the B12. Very often for us, this is not methyl B12 because methyl B12 can produce the same side effects that 5-LMTHF can, right? So that it's a methylation factor. For some of us, it's too much. So you've got to find the right B12 for you. for a lot of MTHFR folks, that's a hydroxo or an adenosine form. But, you know, some people are even on cyano. There's so much stuff on the internet. Cyanide, it has cyanide in it. Yeah, it does. It's okay. You're never going to take enough of a dose, right? Like they inject this, they mainline this in hospitals. You're never, ever going to take enough cyanocobalamin to actually get a significant dose of cyanide. It's fine. So, you know, if cyano is the form that agrees with people, or the form that they can afford, or the form that they can tolerate, or the form that their doctor is willing to inject, that's fine too. It's okay. We're not gonna die of cyanocobalamin. And it doesn't cause symptoms like the methylcobalamin does, which is a bonus for some people, right? So, okay. And then we do the initial 5-LMTHF start. And from the symptom tracker and the reaction to both folic acid elimination and to the folate start, then usually we have a little bit of an idea of how slow to start the methylfolate and how much people are going to have symptoms. If people notice a lot of symptom difference taking the folic acid out, then we start lower. If they notice symptoms even with adding in food sources of methylfolate, then we may actually just focus on food sources and never get to the adding in a supplemental methylfolate, right? Because some people are just very sensitive, right? They're very sensitive to this, and we've got to respect that. Or we may skip methylfolate and go to something like a SAMe, right? Most of the people that I see come to my office, but I don't actually have an office anymore. Come to my computer screen now, who haven't done the preliminaries usually come to me when they're stuck in a bottleneck, right? Like they've been moving forward, but they kind of got stuck somewhere and they don't know why. And it's usually because they didn't do the preliminaries or they're taking the wrong doses. So the next phase in this journey, I like to call pushing forward. So this is where the really great stuff happens. It's also the most up and down phase of this journey, right? So this is right after your initial methylfolate start. Your body is getting used to having good active methylation. And so we start to see good days like people haven't had in a while. And we start to see some of that energy and some of that vibrance. But we also start to see some bad days, right? Because they're pulling backlog out of storage, and that's a big deal. So this is very up and down, because as you're pulling out backlog, some days your body liberates more than it can actually deal with in that day. And that feels yucky. It just feels yucky, right? You're still moving forward, but it doesn't always feel like it day to day, because it is like very just stuff is happening, stuff is coming up, right? This can take months to years. It all depends on how much folic acid you've had. So I definitely do notice like people who've been treated for infertility or repeat miscarriages and who've been given like the 5 gram or 10 gram doses of folic acid, straight old folic acid, they have a rough time in this initial phase, right? Like that is, it gets in there and it blocks stuff up. If you've taken prescriptions that conflict. So birth control, hormone replacement, methotrexate in an MTHFR person who hasn't had good methylfolate during that time, that can be bad because they've also had a pretty massive dose of folic acid with it. You know, like all of these things play in. Past and lifetime toxin exposure. So I had one MTHFR client who upholstered cars for a living. Like he reupholstered cars, and it was all like vinyl and leather and these crazy adhesives, and yeah, he had a lot of toxins to deal with, right? Like that was a person who just had a lot to deal with. Dental assistants, yeah, always heavy metal toxic. Anybody who works in a nail salon, they've got all those acrylics and things like that. Yeah, I mean, hairdressers very often. There's a lot of just toxicity that they're exposed to. Anybody in an industrial setting or a lot of home renovation stuff, very toxic. So yeah, toxin exposure. And this is lifetime toxin exposure too. Also within the MTHFR community, we tend to have a more, I would say, there's a good portion of us that are less likely to follow rules and therefore more likely to dabble with, with illegal substances. And also there's a greater tendency towards addiction. And so there's lots of people with addictions in their past and with, you know, some pretty serious chemical exposure there. Nutritional status, right? So if you've lived on Cheerios and Wonder Bread, then it's a different picture than somebody who's grown up with, say, organic vegetables and fruits, right? And most of us are somewhere in the middle, somewhere in between there, or, you know, diets have gone from Cheerios and Wonder Bread to, you know, maybe a little bit more veggie heavy or whatever, but you'd be surprised, right? Like there's plenty of adults out there that still live on Cheese Whiz and hot dogs. So it's okay. It is what it is. And then self-care in general, right? Like, do you sleep? Do you drink water? Do you exercise? Do you do the things you're supposed to? And then after pushing forward, we get to the maintenance phase. And this is what happens when the worst of the backlog is over, right? Your body has dealt with the most scary and pressing things on that big to-do list. And so there's still stuff. We all have backlog. Every human from birth to death, and literally birth, right? There's all sorts of cord blood studies that show that neonates have something like over 300 measurable industrial and agricultural toxins in their blood at birth, right? Like this is at birth, cord blood. So, you know, backlog is, we're born with it, we die with it, but that big scary chunk of it, when that kind of diminishes, then we enter this maintenance phase. And this phase, there's a lot less down days, right? Like this phase is a lot smoother. It's a lot more predictable. There's not as much of the up and down because the backlog isn't coming out as much. In this phase, so I made a mistake in the first season of the podcast because I talked about dosing 5-LMTHF, forgetting that not everybody's in this phase, right? Like in the maintenance phase, we do sort of a mixed dosing or an intuitive dosing or a pulsed dosing. In the other phase, not necessarily. In the other phases, we're chasing doses higher. But once you get to maintenance, then, you know, good days, you need far, far less methylfolate than you would have in your pushing forward days, or none, right? Most days I rely on food sources and don't take a methylfolate. Maybe 1 or 2 days a week, I will take like a vitamin, a multivitamin and a supplement. But this is where the intuitive dosing, the pulsed dosing, and the mixed dosing strategies kick in. So, so when you're in that pushing forward phase, we do want to be dosing all the time and dosing regularly and kind of pushing, keeping that ball rolling. And again, it does bring up some bad days because you're actually doing the work that needs to happen. So maintenance is where you'll be after the hard work is done. It's just living day to day. With MTHFR, we still need good self-care, and we still occasionally pop into the pushing forward phase, right? If you have a baby, if you have a big hormone shift like menopause, if you have a surgery or a procedure, if you have a big toxin exposure, right? Sometimes even if you get a flu, right, you'll pop back into the pushing forward phase and need a higher dose for a little while, and then pop back out into maintenance. But that's okay, right? That's life. And once you kind of know how it feels, you can follow that rhythm of it. If you've never eliminated folic acid, you probably aren't where you think you are. And that's, again, I see that all the time, right? People will be like, oh, I've been taking methylfolate for, 5 years. I'm fine. I'm in maintenance. I've got to be in maintenance. Yeah, no, probably not. You're also very likely taking a really wrong dose if you've still got folic acid in, because the folic acid, again, interferes with methylfolate function. So if I take a person who's had methylfolate, say for 5 years, right? And this is common, and they have never taken the folic acid out. When we go back and start at the beginning, we'll stop everything, take the folic acid out of their diet, start really slow. Everybody hates this. They grumble about it. It's awful, right? Nobody wants to do this part. But we take the folic acid out, start slow, and reintroduce their 5-LMTHF at a half dose and maybe a quarter if they notice a lot of symptom resolution with just the folic acid, right? Because usually they're taking a way higher dose of the methylfolate than they ever needed to be, because it was fighting with the folic acid, right? Like it was all just jammed up in there. So with the folic acid issue, right? Like folic acid is like Barbie and natural folate is like real humans. It's totally different creature. These are not the same, right? It's so perfect and so shiny and so plasticky. Your body just can't ignore it. It cannot pass that up. Your receptors get really grabby with it, right? And they hold on to it and it sits there for ages because your receptors don't want to let it go, right? Like it's like the shiniest, prettiest version of folate that they've ever seen ever. And then it has to go through this very slow enzyme, aptly named DHFR slow. It just jams up the works. Competes with and inhibits the activity of 5-LMTHF, and it needs to get out of there. Also, yeah, if folic acid is still in there, then again, your dose of 5-LMTHF will change really significantly for most people. Every now and then there's an exception, but for most people, that's true. And with the folic acid, so this is, I should have added a slide in here, but this is where, has anybody seen that term DFE, dietary folate equivalence? So this is sometimes on like supplement labels or nutritional labels, you'll see this DFE and it sounds really mysterious, but it's because folic acid is so grabby. So folic acid is actually something like 1.4, like one microgram of folic acid is actually 1.4 micrograms DFE, because it's like that much better and that much sparklier to your receptors, right? Like, so for every microgram of natural folate, it would folic acid is like 1.4 times as good as, except for us, it's not, right? Because your body just likes it so much better, right? And again, it's synthetic versus natural, right? The natural ones are different. When I say natural folate too, I want you to understand this is a group of molecules. It's not one thing. Natural folate comes in hundreds of varieties, just depending on the source that it's coming from. It's from different plants. It's from, bacteria produce natural folate. There's all sorts of things. Yeasts produce natural folate. And so every kind of iteration of that looks a little bit different. And then there's folic acid, which is like the perfected one, right? It's the difference between a natural diamond and a cut diamond. Natural diamonds don't look like all that, right? Like it's a rock and it looks like kind of a clear-ish rock, maybe a quartz crystal. A cut diamond is a thing, right? Like that looks like something fancy. And so it really is. It's like that to your body, right? Like this one is so compelling that your body really thinks it wants it. But then for us, can't use it. All right, general rules. And you've heard me say this again a million times. Start low and go slow. Take weekends off. I am a huge advocate of weekends off of supplements. Your body does not need to be hit on the head with a hammer every damn day of your life. Like take a weekend off. Right? We can take breaks from things and it will actually help the way you metabolize and process them. There are exceptions. Obviously, prescriptions are an exception, right? So if you have a prescription drug from your physician, that needs to be taken as prescribed. That is not a weekends off scenario. But supplements, by and large, we do actually want to get breaks in there. Also, as a general rule, food first, supplements second, right? If you can get something from your food in an adequate quantity, that is the way to do it, not from a supplement. Pills are pills, right? Whether they're natural or artificial or synthetic or whatever, a pill is a pill is a pill, right? We want to take as few of them as possible. I do not want, and lots of people come in with a handful of like, well, I saw this one on the Discovery Channel and I saw this one on the whatever, and my friend was taking this one, so now I'm taking it, and da, 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 da. Yes, and there are lots of great supplements out there, and some of them are very life enhancing, but only in the right context, right? Otherwise, it's just more stuff for your body to deal with and more stuff for your body to process, and that's really easy to lose sight of. But like every supplement you take, every pill you swallow, you are asking your body to do work. Your body has to metabolize it. Your body has to do something with it, break it down, eliminate it, keep it, utilize it, store it, whatever it's going to do with it. You are asking your body to do some work. So give your body weekends off of that work, whatever it is, right? Give your body weekend breaks. And also, variety is king, or queen, perhaps. Variety is queen. I'm addicted to Bridgerton right now. I've watched it like 3 times in a row, which is really sad to say, but it's my little escape at this moment. So variety is going to be queen today, not king. But yeah, so with these natural folates, there are so many of them, right? And we don't actually have good research on which folates or which food sources of folate or whatever any particular body might like best. As far as I know, there's never actually been research on the different natural folates, comparatively in any context anyway. So yeah, just get a variety. Again, start low, go slow, change one thing at a time. If I can add anything to this little snail montage, it would be track your damn symptoms. Sorry, guys. I know, broken record. So for today, we have a little bit of homework. Number 1, if you aren't doing it already, start your symptom tracking. And number 2, give a try at the 5-LMTH dose quiz. It's uploaded in the course materials, I think it's called course materials, which is on the left-hand side of your screen. So when you're looking at your screen within the methylfolate masterclass course, you should have a little tab that says course materials. And it'll be there in week 1. Where'd you guys go? Oh, there you are. Okay. So does anybody have questions about this first part? Because I know we kind of roared through quite a lot. Made sense?
I have a couple of questions,
Ooh, hit me with it.
which I wrote down under my questions. Is there some sort of antidote besides tincture of thyme for taking too much?
Tincture of thyme is the most effective one. There's a couple of things you can do. So vigorous exercise does actually reduce our methylation, and that can really help. It's not the thing that most people think of, unfortunately, when they're crawling up the walls. Like most of them think of laying down and taking deep breaths, or trying to do like calming panic attack-y type things. But vigorous exercise does help. Also, niacin helps. But niacin is sort of an uneasy solution, simply because it has to be the flushing type of niacin, which is actual niacin. And a niacin flush also feels a little bit like a panic attack. So people don't love this solution, right? But if you're in that scary, I haven't slept for 3 days and I'm hallucinating place, then better to have a niacin flush and just be ready for it, right? And know it's going to happen. And a niacin flush is exactly what it sounds like. It's like inducing a hot flash, right? You get hot, your skin all gets prickly, you start to sweat, face gets red, the whole shebang. And it's because all of your blood vessels open up. So niacin is a good way to quench those extra methylation things. I've heard some people say that a sauna helps a little bit. I haven't had the occasion to try that. So every time I've taken too high a dose, I've not been near a sauna, unfortunately. So I've just done the exercise thing. I also never seem to have niacin on hand when I need it. It's one of those things that like I buy and then the bottle sits in the cupboard and then I clean it out one day and it's been expired for 3 years and I get rid of it and then I need it and I don't have it. So that's my story with niacin. What are some other things? Time is really the biggest one. Like it just takes time to wear off, and it really truly can be days or even a week, right? Like it's if you really massively overdose, it can be not fun, and it takes a while.
Okay, that's super helpful. I mean, I think it just decreases the fear around what if I take too much?
Yeah.
What if I do?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think knowing the symptoms too helps to decrease the fear because you can recognize it. And especially when you're symptom tracking, like the other thing, I mentioned this in one of the Tuesday tips, but the symptoms don't always show up like you take a dose and then you have symptoms. That would be very convenient if they did, because then everybody would connect it with the 5-LMTHF. But a lot of times it's like you take this dose, you actually feel great 3, 4, 5, 7 days. And then you start to have symptoms, right? And so that makes it a little bit more difficult to track. But if you know that symptom picture, then at least there's that mental association where you can be like, okay, you know what? Like, back it up. Something is happening here. What if I try decreasing my dose? And so it's not always, it can take a little bit of that edge off. And the assumption is that this isn't people's, like, people are mostly changing their doses after their initial start. The initial start can be really rocky, because if you've never had any of this, then, like, it's like this mysterious hammer out of nowhere. Suddenly, this thing is falling on your head. So yeah, it can be interesting. What else? Any other questions? Yeah. Go for it, Stacey.
So I don't know if I'm on the other side where you talked about this, the dropping, like the serotonin, because I know when I first started taking it, like I felt a little like fuzzy, loopy, and then I continued kind of pushing through it, and it just sucked the energy out of me. Like I was like, yeah, I wish I had like excess energy. That'd be awesome. Like, give me that side effect. I mean, like just extreme exhaustion. So I don't know if that's something
Tanked, exhausted energy.
and then
okay, so that we'd have to dig into a little bit. It could be a bottleneck. A lot of times I do see exhaustion around bottlenecks, where it's like your body's trying to do this work and it's got all this stuff prepped to do the work, but then it's stuck somewhere, and so it just feels awful, right? Like icky. And very often it's fatigue, or it's emotional. Like I'll see a lot of people who are just like, I keep bursting into tears, I don't know why, right? Like there's nothing really going on except that this is happening. Or it can feel just like, like I'm constantly in this detox place. I'm constantly getting, headaches, or just feeling gross, or feeling low, or feeling blah. So that could be a bottleneck. But yeah, we should talk a little bit about what kind of background you've done, how you got to this place. How long have you been taking methylfolate?
Well, I took it for about a month, and I'm like, this is terrible. Like I feel worse than before.
Yeah.
So I stopped taking that, did some more research, started taking folinic acid.
Great.
Which hasn't done that, but I don't feel like I'm making progress, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So you may not be. Sorry. And you did the right thing, right? Like you've got to kind of back out of that and kind of restart in a gentle way. Are you taking the other B vitamins at all? Like, are you getting
taking a good B complex?
Good. Okay.
Yeah, and I've been like forcing myself to exercise and do like the regular things, which I feel better when I do, but then still have more fatigue than I did before I even started taking anything, right?
Yeah. What dose of the methylfolate were you taking before?
I can't, I have to go back and research.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would suggest at this point, like you're doing the other Bs, you're getting a B12 as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. You're doing the other Bs, you've got all the background in place. And it sounds like, like you've taken care of a lot of the big stuff.
Yeah.
So I would restart the methylfolate, but at a much smaller dose than what you were taking initially. Keep the folinic acid, like keep that in the background, because it sounds like you're not doing badly with it. You're just not doing great. Right. But restart the methylfolate at a small dose, like maybe a quarter of what you were doing before, and just see what happens. See how that feels to you.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll be curious, but yeah, keep us posted.
Right. Like,
because I know. Exactly.
But I do want to make progress. I'm like, okay, we'll try it.
Yeah. I mean, you just don't want to be stuck, always spinning on the same wheel, right? Like we've got to actually push through some of that stuff, and backlog can feel really awful in the beginning, like it's such a difficult part of this journey, because for a lot of people, they do notice some relief mixed in with the bad days, right? Like there's also good days that are better than they used to be. So they have this hope moving forward. But for some people, they don't have those good days. They just have more kind of crappy days. And that's hard, right? Like it's really hard to keep somebody convinced that they're doing the right thing when they feel crap.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully we can get, fingers crossed, we'll get some of those good higher energy, like things moving forward days. If not, we may try a folate alternative, right? So keep the folinic acid, but then do something like a SAMe or something like that, right?
Okay.
So yeah, give it a shot. We'll give it a shot. Any other questions from anybody?
So you had mentioned the reasons for like pushing forward big things like menopause and having a baby. So I've had bronchitis for about a week and a half now. And it just dawned on me that I might increase my methylfolate dose just to see whether or not this would help my system
Yeah, it could be a
address
good
it.
idea.
I mean, is that a reasonable thing to do when
Oh, yeah.
you're sick and otherwise stressed?
Yeah, yeah. Every time. So especially when you've been on this journey for a while, there's a lot of play in that dosing where you have kind of a broader range of tolerances, and you can really increase that dose when your body needs extra support so that you can kind of get out of these situations more quickly. And you may need an increased dose for a couple of weeks even, I always, like, even if there's something going around at work, I'll kind of bump up my dose a little bit, or something going around at Sabrina's school, which is like all the time right now. So I don't really do that. But if they send out an email saying there's something going around at the school, I'll be like, okay, time for extra. So, yeah. But also, like, I'll notice nights, like if I don't have a great sleep or something like that, even if it's just everyday kind of day-to-day stressors, then I'll bump it up a little bit. But yeah, that's harder in the beginning because you're so sensitive to it anyway, that it's, yeah. As you move forward, your tolerances will get a lot broader. So you have a bigger window where, even if you take the high end of this dose, you're not going to get into trouble. Or if you take the low end of the dose, you're not going to get into trouble, right? Like you can be in this buffer zone. Whereas in the beginning, you have like, if your dose isn't in here, you're screwed. Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun journey. So yeah, but yeah, I think it would be a good idea with the bronchitis to take a little bit extra.
Okay, well, that's helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were symptom tracking really, really well, I probably would have been able to see that in the symptom tracker, but instead it was, I wonder if I have to increase my dose while I'm sick.
Totally, which is, I mean, reasonable. And don't, with symptom tracking, a lot of it is internal too. Like there's some cognition that has to happen with the symptom tracking. It's not always like, oh, I see the pattern. Yeah, sometimes it's like, okay, maybe I should take a little extra care. But yeah, don't worry. And for having had bronchitis for a week and a half, you look amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the amazing thing is that my oxygen sats have been like unremarkable at 94, 95, which is really low for a healthy individual.
Yeah.
And so I've been saying, well, I'm sick, but I've never felt better while I was sick than I have this time.
Oh, that's great.
So I don't know if it's the MTHFR, journey supporting me through the illness.
Moving forward.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
Yeah. No, I think you're definitely moving forward, right? Like you're getting sort of that cushion of like, this work has been done. These things are no longer hanging out on the to-do list, right? Which is great. It makes a big difference. Makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
Just one quick other thing is with the folic acid. How long does it usually take? Because I've been promoting this. Like, how long does it usually take to kind of clear that out of your system once you stop taking it? And also, is there any like research that I can point some of my friends to say like, yeah, this, I know doctors are like folic acid, like just, it's all the same, right? Like, is there any research to point to that?
There is. So I'll send you the one study that talks about folic acid actually inhibiting methylation. There's only one. But there's also a really large and growing body of research that shows that excess folic acid shows up in the bloodstream as unmetabolized folic acid, and that unmetabolized folic acid has been linked to, like 40 different types of cancer, to all sorts of mental illness, to all kinds of things. So it's a problem that's actually becoming more of a mainstream issue as we see these bigger kind of downstream effects. So it's not just for like the MTHFR folks, because we're kind of in the crazy category of patients, unfortunately, right? Like doctors look at us and they're like, no, that doesn't matter. It's not a thing, right? Okay, yeah, great. It's not a thing. So we can't really, like they're never going to change, say, public health measures like folic acid supplementation for us, but they might if they can show that it's a significant impact on cancer. So yeah, there's a lot of research in that direction. So I'll send you the one study with the inhibiting methylation first, and then just a few examples of the cancer research. But the cancer research, there's like hundreds, if not thousands of studies. So yeah, it's
in that blood test that they do, like, is there a certain blood, like what's that called, where they can detect the unmetabolized
folic acid? So it's not a mainstream blood test, and that one doesn't have great, like, I don't think you would get a mainstream MD to ever order that. They can do it for lab research, right? But they don't ever do it clinically. So what we have clinically is serum folate. So they call it serum folate, right? And it doesn't differentiate between any of the forms of folate. So the folate might be active 5-LMTHF. It might be natural food sourced folate. It might be folic acid. It might be unmetabolized folic acid. But what I see in a lot of MTHFR folks is that their serum folate comes back super high, right? Like crazy high. And the doctor's like, no, you don't have a folate deficiency. Look at this great number, right? And it's like 3 times the upper, the limit of normal, whatever. That's unmetabolized folic acid. That's not helpful. That's not useful. That's not doing anything for that human, right? And it can take years to bring that number down. Honestly, it really does take a long time to get that out of there. So, and I mean, folic acid is everywhere, right? Like obviously it's in foods, but it's in everybody's multivitamin. It's in birth control pills, a lot of birth control pills for our daughters. It's in, you know what I mean? Like it's all over the damn place. And they do it as an additive. Like doctors wouldn't, a lot of times they don't even think to tell you that there's folic acid in a prescription you're taking, because what? It's just that prevents side effects. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's everywhere.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll definitely, I'll send links to that research because it's pretty compelling, like it's a big issue. But I'm hoping that we start to rethink, because it's, like we're supposed to get 400 micrograms of folate daily, except more in pregnancy, like 600 micrograms, right? So food has been enhanced to include 400 micrograms in the average diet, right? 400 micrograms of supplemental folic acid, not of natural sourced folate, but of supplemental folic acid. And so for the standard American diet, lots of people are getting their folic acid in a pretty decent dose. But this was supplemented for the standard American diet about 50 years ago when they started supplementing. The standard American diet has shifted, right? We are a lot carb heavier now than we used to be. And so now lots of people are getting twice what they're supposed to be in folic acid before they even take a multivitamin, before they take a B complex, before they take anything on top of that. And then it's in our prescriptions, it's in energy drinks, it's in, like Cliff bars and that sort of thing. Not that Cliff bars particularly have anything bad about them, but like meal replacement bars and meal replacement shakes and all of these things that we're doing, it's all folic acid. It's not, and so people are ending up with like 3, 4, 5 times what they should be getting every day. And that's a problem, right? Like that's an issue. And so the initial idea behind the folic acid supplementation was a really great one. And it did prevent a lot of birth defects, and it helped a lot of people. But now we're getting to the point where we're such an overfed and oversupplemented culture that it's becoming really harmful. So yeah, I'll put the links to those up in the group chat for Methylfolate Masterclass. And yeah, any other questions? No? Okay. I'm going to send out a poll too to see what's the best time to have a second meeting just for a Q&A in case people have additional questions or want to talk about, like deep dive into their own symptoms or some part of the class or something that you didn't understand or whatever. So I'll send out just a questionnaire to see what time is good for everybody and we'll sort it out from there. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.